The story of the cherry camp is probably one of the most often told and one of the best stories about Horseshoe Bay Farms. So when orchard operations were in full production, they had the challenge that every orchard did, which is how do we get people for 2 or 3 weeks at 2 different times of the year, first for the cherries and for the apples, to pick all of this. And so their idea was to create a camp, like Boy Scout camp, and they would gather 100 to 110 teenage boys 14 to 18 years old, from as far away as Chicago, but certainly from throughout the state. Had a mess hall, had a canteen where they sold soda pop and candy, and it had 110 beds in it, packed in there pretty tightly. So these teenage boys would come for 2 to 3 weeks. They stayed in what was called the dormitory, which was the converted clubhouse. Every morning they rose to reveille. Every night the flag was lowered, taps was played, and they were required to go to bed. Trucks would pick them up, and they would work from roughly 8 o'clock until 4 o'clock. Lunch was brought in. It was typically bologna sandwiches, cookies, washed down with Kool-Aid, and they ate that right out under the cherry trees. The kids were required to pick 7.5 pails minimum a day for their room and board. Everything above that was cash in their pockets, and the kids who really hustled could make up to $50 a week, which back in the 40s and 50s, when most of this was going on, was a lot of money for a teenage kid. At 4 o'clock, all the kids came down. They could swim. They built a baseball field. They could play baseball. They had basketball courts. They had horseshoes. They had a boxing ring. So the kids relaxed until dinner time, typically pot roast or chicken, mashed potatoes, and every night there was cherry pie. So every Sunday, the kids would put on their cleanest white shirt and load into the trucks, and they would go into town. But they could only get a ride into town if they attended church. So after church, they could walk around the village of Egg Harbor. They could get an ice cream, get a soda pop, and they felt pretty big. This was their, quote, big night out, going into town on Sunday morning and Sunday afternoon. I get calls on a regular basis from people who want to come up and visit, who attended cherry camp for 2, 3, 4 years in a row. When you think about it, it was a coming of age for these kids. This is how they matured, and they have unbelievably positive memories.